You're listening to Sword and Pen.
Hey everyone, this is Rich with the Sword and Pen podcast from Military Veterans in Journalism. Today, I'm joined by Marty Baron, most recently the editor of the Washington Post, and prior to that, the Boston Globe. Marty, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Marty, I know you've recently retired. I just wanted to maybe ask you what you were getting into in your retirement.
I've been exploring a lot of different opportunities, but one thing that I've decided to do is to write a book about my experiences, very much centered on my time at the Washington Post, 8 years there, but also incorporating some of my previous experiences, particularly in Boston, involving our investigation of the Catholic Church, in Miami when I was editor there, the election of 2000, the disputed presidential election of 2000, as well as the Elian Gonzalez case, which was a dispute over the young Cuban boy who was picked up at sea and whether he should be returned to his father in Cuba or kept in Miami with his relatives there. And so that's what I'm primarily focusing on, and talking to some other people about other opportunities.
Right. So I also understand that the book is aiming to cover maybe where politics and tech converge and the future of news at large.
It's the title is Collision of Power. It's really a look at these different centers of power and how they came together in a somewhat of a conflict during the Trump years. You have the president, who is almost certainly the most powerful person on earth. You had an owner of the Washington Post whose power was derived from his success in the field of technology, and was wealthiest person on earth. And then you had the Washington Post, which is the power of the press. And all of that intersected during my time at the Washington Post.
So speaking about the future of news and what news is and how politics plays into that, corporations, et cetera, obviously Military Veterans in Journalism focuses on veterans. Our main mission is to put more vets in newsrooms. Do you think that veterans offer something unique at this time that we found ourselves in the country, in the world, and of journalism?
I do, and I've been very much encouraging that we, at the Washington Post, that we seek out veterans to hire, and we did. I wish we had more success than we had, but that's still something to work on. Look, this country's been at war for a couple of decades now. It's a big part of the American experience. There's a whole generation that's grown up since 9/11. Many people can't even remember 9/11 for that matter. And so it's a big part of the American experience. And I think it's really important that newsrooms reflect America in its totality. And a big part of that is having people who've served in the military in one fashion or another, and including people who've been in combat. And so there's too little of that, I think, in our newsrooms. There was a time during the Vietnam War when we had a draft in this country where a lot of people in newsrooms had served in the military, and now very few do, or did. And I think that's something missing in our newsrooms, and I think it's really important that we have that perspective. The military is an important institution in our country. These wars that we've been in for a couple of decades have been a big part of the American experience. And I think there are other advantages that come with having veterans on staff as well. Not the least of which is a familiarity with weaponry, particularly at a time when we're seeing mass shootings in the United States.
Right, and others have pointed out with recent extremism that has popped up in militarized fashion that veterans can offer, insightful analytical coverage of what's going on based on their experience in the military.
I think that's right, and I think that also we want to have insights into the military as an institution. I mean, there's a tendency often to cover the military as an institution strictly from the top down. I think what is one of the advantages of having people who've served in the military is that they can help us cover the institution from the bottom up, from the perspective of people who have enlisted. And so I think it's really important. And that's a very different perspective than what you hear from people at the top. And whether it's the civilian leadership of the military, or whether it's the generals themselves. And so, look, I mean, in newsrooms, we should have people from all corners of American society, lots of different kinds of people. We talk a lot about diversity, and I think it's important, but I think it stretches beyond racial, ethnic lines and lines of identity into sort of life experience. And so I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And what you brought up about the institution and looking at it from the bottom up instead of the top down, I think is really important, because at least my time in the Army, which wasn't that long ago, I recall nobody spoke to the press. I mean, there was, if you did, there was usually hell to be paid.
Well, I mean, I mean, there are plenty of people in the military who have spoken to the press, and there are people who've been embedded, obviously, with troops overseas, particularly during times of combat. I think the military has become more reluctant. The feelings within the military have sort of waxed and waned over the years. On the one hand, they are wary of the press. On the other hand, they're upset when there's no reflection in the press of the sacrifices that are being made by people in the military. Well, the only way you can do that, provide that kind of coverage, is if you're actually there with the troops. And so, the military sometimes wants us and sometimes doesn't want us. And so it kind of depends on the circumstances.
Right. I recall being on the side of a mountain in Nangarhar in Afghanistan a few years ago, and there was somebody, I was assuming it was a stringer, taking a photo, and they said, "Oh yeah, this ended up in the Washington Post. The soldier had a beard, had his shirt off on a 50 cal," and we all got yelled at for that. But I think my point is of bringing this up is that the human aspect of it, because soldiers and service members are humans, and hearing that story from that end is extremely important, so that we see it. Yes, we see it as an institution, but we see the human aspect to that institution, and we can relate, which then draws, covers the gaps that are bridged between us.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's what we in the press want to do. The responsible press would like to do, is to sort of capture what's really happening on the ground. Not just in combat, but the people who are serving in combat, and what their life is like, and what they're experiencing, and humanize it. And by the way, journalists are humans too. So I think it's really important to understand that. And
Right.
We all have our human qualities. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. We're just human.
Right. And yeah, I think it's obviously important to point that out. And speaking about institutions, I've read a couple of the recent commencement speeches that you've delivered, and one of them you spoke about the importance of institutions over self, and not to emphasize this personal branding and whatnot, which I'd like to ask about. But I mean, how much of a parallel do you draw between the institution of journalism and something like the institution of the military?
Well, look, I mean, I haven't served in the military myself, so I want to be very, very careful not to sort of express views on something that I, have a limited knowledge of. But I think they're quite different from what I can tell. I mean, the military is a very regimented environment, obviously, and newsrooms are not a very regimented environment. And a lot of the people who are in newsrooms are kind of people who reject regimentation, frankly. It's a little bit closer to a university faculty than it is, well, not exactly like it, but more like a university faculty than it is like the military. Where the faculty want to kind of do their own things. They operate within within the framework of an institution, and yet, they take their own initiative. They do their own things. It all comes together in some sort of unified whole, but it's not regimented in the way that the military is.
Right. I think there's some clear differences. I think maybe in forms of similarity of serving an institution that's bigger than yourself. I think it's the values that go along with that, and the dedication to duty of saying, like, I'm committing myself not for financial gains or anything or fame, but rather because I feel like there's something important to be done, and I could be part of that.
Right. I think that's right. And I think, look, I mean, all of us who work within institutions, I think the best of us want to sort of serve the interests of that institution. We joined it because we believe in the core principles. And to a large degree, we subordinate our individual interests on behalf of the interests of the institution that we believe in. It's perhaps in the military, the subordination goes far deeper, is to a far greater degree than it is in the press, for sure.
Right. And just to touch on the personal branding piece, I mean, I think when I got out of the military, I went through J school, and I think a lot of other veterans obviously have as well, and a lot of our membership. One of the big things that's pushed is like, hey, look, as a young journalist, you have to have a brand. What's your social media look like? What is your message? What is your brand? Who are you? And that's something that is really difficult, I've seen, for vets to do, because you're so used to separating yourself and becoming part of the bigger group that now you're being pushed into like embracing yourself and promoting yourself. And I just curious what your thoughts are on that, since you mentioned it.
Right. I mean, I think it's tricky, and I think it's still being worked out, as evidenced by many of the controversies surrounding social media, now at the Associated Press, previously at the Washington Post, involving me. And I think that, we still have to figure that out. I mean, I think that it's, look, journalists join these institutions like the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or many other institutions because of the reputation they've established, right? The reputation was built on certain things. The reputation was built on the institution's principles, its standards, its practices. Those are what built the reputation of the institution. Now we live in a time where people have access to means of expression that didn't exist in the old days, and that is social media, so a Twitter account or Facebook or whatever it might be, and those sorts of things are not subjected to editing in the same way that stories are, and people even feel more freedom on those social networks than they do when they're giving a radio interview or when they're giving a television interview or something like that. We at the Post had standards that are supposed to apply. People can be looser. They can show more of their personality. They can provide more insight. They can provide more wit. They can be more informal. They can all of that. But where we drew the line was that people expressing their own personal views on the sorts of things that we are covering. That comes into particular focus when it comes to politics but on other things as well. So that the reporters are not opinion writers. We have opinion writers. They write the editorials, they write the columns, things like that. But that if you're a reporter, you have your lane, and your lane is not to be expressing your own personal opinion. You can provide insight, perspective, analysis, all those sorts of things, personality, wit, what have you. So there's a lot more freedom. But that is not that you don't have total freedom to just go out and express your views. And the reason is because reporters are viewed as representatives of the institution. In fact, the reason they probably have so many followers is because they're associated with the institution. And so there have to be some boundaries, there have to be some guidelines that govern that. Working those out to everybody's satisfaction is really difficult. It's proving to be really difficult. And yes, while the reporters can develop their own brands, at least in my estimation, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they have complete freedom to just express their views on any subject that they'd like, because they're not seen by the public as just expressing their own personal views. They're seen as expressing the views of the institution.
Of course, right. Which, I think obviously nobody's perfect and not every veteran comes out of the box amazing, but I think by and far, the typical experience of serving in the military is subordinating oneself to the institution's larger needs or reputation that must be upheld. And yeah, you could have your own social media in the military too, but you can't go on there and speak about certain things. There's rules against it for the better of the organization as a whole.
Right, and that's true of police. That's true of officers of the court. That's true of all people in all sorts of professions. Is that there are certain rules that govern their behavior, which constrain their individual activities and individual forms of expression. And so, so I don't think it's all that different in journalism in that way. But yeah, and I think that people who come out of at least my experience with veterans who've served on our staff, is they do come with a certain respect for the institution and a sort of a adherence to authority that is not as common among journalists who have not gone through the military. So one of our former reporters, when he came on board, he was constantly calling me sir. I had to specifically request that he not do that. I think it took years to break him. I'm not sure I entirely did. That he could just call me Marty. That would be fine. He didn't need to call me sir. And when I would tell him that, he would say, yes, sir.
Yeah, definitely hard to break some habits over others. But yeah, great points. And something that I was taught in J school that I thought I took very personally or very much to the heart was, yeah, it's not about your opinion. It's not about what you think. I mean, those things are labeled opinion very specifically, but I found that once I graduated, my eyes opened up to the bigger world of news and journalism. I found that some respected institutions and others that weren't adhering to it, at least in some aspects or some articles or whatever it was, one off here or there. And it was frustrating to me being new to it because I was like, this is what I was just told. I mean, I was just banged into my head from my instructors, and I very much appreciated that and felt easy to conform to because of what I had done in the military. I was like, all right, rules. I like rules, easy to follow. I can do this.
Yeah, well, these things change. This is a very contentious subject at the moment as to how much freedom people should have. The nature of journalism has changed over the years. It's not the same today. If you go back and look at stories that were written a half century ago, those stories read very differently from the stories today. They're virtually unreadable, frankly, and in many ways. But standards change. Look, standards within the military have changed, I mean, as well. The military allows certain greater freedoms today, I think, in terms of appearance and all of that than they did in the past. And so institutions change over time based on changing social mores and societal norms. And so this is something that I think the profession is really working through right now. As always, when you try to work through these things, it's pretty fitful, it's pretty difficult, it's contentious, it's controversial. People have strong emotions about it. I assume that we'll figure it out. Look, there are no, as you know, journalism doesn't come with an actual rule book. Each institution can set its own rules, but there's no rule book and there's no certification process. As you don't register as a journalist, none of that sort of stuff. You don't have to get a license to be a journalist in the United States, thankfully. And there are different kinds of journalism. There's journalism, advocacy journalism, and there's commentary, and there are, publications or media outlets that have strong points of view. That's always been the case in the United States going back to the founding. It was originally, pamphlets that were highly ideological in nature. And this notion that journalism was some sort of, neutral party in the political environment, that certainly wasn't the case at the founding of the country. This has been more a phenomenon of the last 100 years and in journalism, and it's evolved particularly over the last 50 to 60 years. And now it's going through some level of rethinking. I think probably in large part as a reaction to what's transpired over the last 4 years, and the attacks that journalists have come under, and the attacks on certain values that most journalists probably hold fairly dear.
Right. Yeah. And the struggle at the same time is to obviously be entertaining or engaging and not just write, this happened on this day at this time. And there you go. There's the news. So
I think that's right. I mean, look, we're journalists. We're not stenographers. I mean, there is a profession called stenography, and that's fine because that's you're just recording exactly what people said. But there's a reason we call it journalism and not stenography. And that is that we try to say, why did this happen? Who's responsible for it happening? Who's going to be affected by it? Who influenced these decisions? It's the story behind the story, and it's not just recitative. People say, just give me the facts. Well, there is stenography. We can just record, take a recording device. But that's not the role. That's not the role of journalists. The role of journalists is to go beyond the superficial, frankly.
Right. So yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to roll up here by asking kind of what do you offer to a young veteran or any veteran for that matter who's thinking about, hey, I think I like this world of journalism. When I get out, I want to kind of dip my feet into it. What would you offer up to that type of person?
Well, first of all, I would encourage it. I mean, I think, as I said at the beginning, I think it's really needed. I think that we need that the presence of military veterans in our newsrooms. They bring a perspective that most people in newsrooms simply don't have. War has been, sadly, has been a part of the American experience over the last couple of decades, and we'll certainly have wars in the future, I'm sure. And so, I think that we should offer the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to continue their training, the opportunity for journalists, for military veterans, like all journalists in newsrooms, to constantly learn new things, to see their careers progress. I think that's offer the opportunity to learn from colleagues, and to try new things, and to develop themselves as individuals, and experience new things. Look, there's some people who come out of the military and they don't want to cover the military, but there's some people who come out of the military and they do want to cover the military, and that's great. I mean, we have had people who, at the Washington Post, just to mention two, Thomas Gibbons Neff, who now works for the New York Times, covers Afghanistan, and but he helped cover the Pentagon for us, and he's back where he served, and Alex Horton, who was also in the military and in combat. He's covering the Pentagon, the military. Not everybody wants to do that. They want to do something else and explore a different aspect of their own interests and their personality, and that's great. And so I think we should just offer people the opportunity to continue to grow, to develop their careers, and that's basically what we want to be doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's obviously important to flag and call out. Is not everybody wants to do military stuff for the rest of their life after they just did it. It doesn't work like that always. But I'll kind of finish off here.
I think it's really important that we recognize that veterans are individuals just like everybody else, and that we shouldn't generalize about their interests and where they want to take their career.
Absolutely. And I think that plays into what my next question was, which was kind of my last question. What would you offer up to editors who are looking at hiring more veterans, or they want to? Because I know you had mentioned you didn't maybe hire as many as you would have wanted to, or you wish it could have been more for whatever reason it was. I mean, what could you offer to an editor who says, I think I want this perspective in my newsroom?
I say, great. I've tried to encourage that as much as possible. I think what we have lacked, frankly, is a reservoir of talent coming forward. And I think that I would hope that with your organization that we will start to see more. I've been encouraging of that, and I would, I'm on the board of the Knight Foundation, which I think is one of the organizations that's helping to support your organization in one fashion or another, and I think it's really important to do. But there's got to be a bigger pool of talent coming out of the military, and so for the editors, I think it's a great opportunity, and it's a little tricky because the veterans who are coming out, they're older. They haven't gone through the normal internships that a lot of younger people have who didn't serve. And so perhaps they haven't checked off all the boxes that that we tend to look for. So I think we have to think beyond that. I would hope that these organizations would try to develop some programs that would actually encourage the hiring of veterans, and provide the kind of training that I think that people perhaps missed out on simply because they were serving in the military, and I don't feel that they should be disadvantaged as a result of that. So I think that there's a lot that the profession can do in this regard, in terms of creating opportunities in the same way that other companies have provided opportunities for veterans as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think translating that service is something that's very difficult, and through advocacy groups like MVJ, I mean, we can easily get on the line with an editor and say, hey, this is what this means. This is what this means. This is how it translates. We have plenty of workshops and things that we have open dialogue about these things. And yeah, it's obviously extremely important to be able to translate it into civilian terms. So with that, I'll ask you, Marty, do you have anything that you want to leave off with before we close out here?
No, I wish your organization all the best of luck. I think it's very much needed, and I trust that it will make a difference, that it will lead to more veterans getting into journalism, and that it will facilitate the hiring and training of journalists within news organizations.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, Marty.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest.